Welcome to China Watch with the Epoch Times. I'm your host, Terri Wu. In this bonus episode, we're not just going to rehash tariffs. We've all heard enough of that. We're going to talk about the scheming of China's negotiators. That's because what we're seeing in the news right now is an example of a communist Chinese deal. This topic is so significant that I rushed to talk to my favorite experts and get my team working late hours just to get this done for you to hear. So let's get right to it. How would someone understand this sort of communist Chinese deal-making? This is how one of the experts I talked to described it.
One of the things I always tell people is they say, well, how do I learn about the Chinese Communist Party? Should I read a book on Chinese history or something like that? And I'm like, no, go watch The Godfather. And they're like, well, why do I need to watch The Godfather to understand the Chinese Communist Party? I'm like, it's the mob. You need to understand it's like the mob.
That was Chris Balding, who we'll hear much more from later. So, are we witnessing Trump's art of the deal? Or are the communist leaders trying their own devious version of it? Did Washington win the first round or did Beijing win? Depends on who you ask. At its press conference in Geneva after the negotiations on May 11th and 12th, Beijing praised the Americans as, quote, professional, highly efficient, rational, objective, and result-oriented. However, Chinese state-run media says that, unlike other countries, China didn't kneel in front of the United States and still got the same thing, a 90-day reprieve and much reduced tariff rates from 145% to 30%. So, it's a big victory. On the U.S. side, the White House also claimed a win by touting the 90-day truce as a fresh start. But when I speak to experts who grew up in China or lived in China for years, they don't see anything magnificent, except that the truce may be the beginning of a marathon. Basically, it's too early to tell. However, they're concerned or even worried about the likelihood that the Trump administration may be fooled by the Chinese Communist Party or the CCP again. These experts' reasoning is based on their understanding of the CCP's cunning nature. When the party acts humbly, they're usually taking a step back temporarily to get ready to be aggressive again. If you've ever seen how a ram backs up before charging into attack, think of that image. For example, China expert Alex Liao told me, people only wake up due to severe suffering from the CCP, whether it's Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick, or Trump himself. They haven't really been pained. Therefore, they haven't woken up yet. To get an idea of how the CCP inflicts that pain, I talked to Chris Balding, a senior fellow at UK-based think tank, the Henry Jackson Society. He's also a contributor to the Epoch Times. He lived in Beijing for a few years while teaching at a top university there. So make sure you stay until the end to hear Chris break down how the CCP attempts to make, or should I say, swindle a deal. But first, as many of my listeners know, I love setting the stage. So since we're thinking trade war, let's talk about the art of war. Because it may be a deal from Trump's point of view, but the CCP sees the U.S.-China competition as a war. One subject that the art of war talks about is seizing dominance in battles. I'll first read the Chinese and then provide a translation. This verse talks about not just achieving victory, but making victory, with a dash of asymmetric warfare. 故知战之地，知战之日，则可千里而会战；不知战之地，不知战之日，则左不能救右，右不能救左。前不能救后，后不能救前，而况远者数十里，近者数里乎？以无度之，越人之兵虽多，一夕一于胜败哉。故曰：胜可善也。敌虽众，可使无斗。Therefore, if you can predict both the place and time of the battle with the enemy, you can engage the enemy even if you have to march 1,000 miles. If we cannot predict the location or time of the battle with the enemy, and if we encounter the enemy hastily, then left army would not be able to rescue the right army. The right army would not be able to rescue the left army. The front army would not be able to rescue the rear army, and the rear army would not be able to rescue the front army. The enemy may have more troops, but are they relevant? Victory can be created. Even if the enemy has more soldiers, we can prevent them from effectively participating in the battle. So how is this excerpt from The Art of War relevant to the trade talks? That's next. You're listening to China Watch. Follow the show. Was that you think we deserve 5 stars? We would love that. Don't just leave an awesome rating. Tell your friends too. We're on Apple and Spotify. Search for China Watch Epoch Times. This podcast is a weekly production with new episodes every Monday evening, plus bonus episodes when I'm really feeling it. Support independent journalism by subscribing to the Epoch Times. Alex shared the above verse from The Art of War with me. The section's subtitle is 虚实, meaning what's false and what's true, or creating some kind of altered reality for the enemy. He said the meaning of the above verse is do not fight your enemy's war. In other words, don't fight a war on your enemy's terms. The timing of the war, the location of the war, and the style of the war are all critical factors in seizing the initiative. Alex also said, it's very possible that the Chinese Communist Party will try to drag it out. In the party's view, Trump's limited term is a significant weakness, as is the GOP's slim majority in Congress. If the Chinese regime can drag it out to January or February and then resume the trade war, they can affect the American economy and the result of the midterms. And even if the CCP has reached an agreement with the United States, it still may not honor its commitment next year, if that means picking its own time or way of fighting with Washington. Yeah, I guess we can call that the art of the Chinese deal. By saying Chinese deal, I mean the CCP deal. Here's Chris's take on the Chinese dragging it out.
Look, I can tell you one of the things that I learned, and this is why I'm so strident on this. One of the things I learned, whether it was with my landlord or my boss, who was the dean of it, of my campus at PKU, stuff like that. Whenever I would go to negotiate something, small, big, whatever, okay, one of the things I learned was very, very clear. If they wanted to do something about it, it was literally like snapping your fingers and it was done.
When comparing the communist rule versus the voting-based style of other countries, a favorite propaganda point of the CCP is how efficient single-party rule is. Anything and everything can be done immediately, just as Chris said. But when they don't want to do something, well,
if they didn't want to do something, they'd be like, great, let's talk about that. Let's do it. Set up a meeting in a week, okay? And then it would be like, oh, he was out of town that week, so it turned into 2 weeks. And then you'd go in and see in 2 weeks and be like, oh, I haven't had a chance to look at it. And tell you what, let me look at it and I'll get back to you in a week, okay? And it would just drag and drag and drag and drag and nothing would ever happen. So I quickly realized that if it was something that they wanted to do, it was literally snapping your fingers and it was done immediately. When I hear China say, tell you what, let's set up a
mechanism
to talk. We're going to have vice ministers and sub-ministers talk and have meetings at different places in China or the United States. And, we'll get back to each other in 6 months. What I'm hearing is Beijing is saying, let's just drag it out. They're not going to do anything. Let's call their bluff.
Chris is also concerned about how the Trump administration deals with the CCP, illustrated with fentanyl.
They're either setting up some type of game or they are going down a very bad path. I'll tell you one other thing that Besant did, okay, that was reported by the Wall Street Journal. I can't confirm it, but this is what the Wall Street Journal says, is that Besant took a small baggie of white powder, and in the meeting with Chinese officials, he says, do you know how many people a bag of fentanyl this big could kill? Okay. The reason I say that, the reason I tell you this is, to be honest, this is relatively out of character. Okay. This is really relatively out of character. Okay. because China's not going to open their markets to the U.S. I mean, that's not happening. Okay. I mean, to think that the Chinese officials don't know about fentanyl is just absurd. Okay. I mean, the head of the PSB, he could be selling it on the side.
And following Chris's example of learning about the CCP's nature by watching The Godfather, he suggested that the CCP should be dealt with differently. For example, how should the leadership of the Public Security Bureau, or PSB, be handled?
The head of the PSB does not care how many Americans die from fentanyl. He probably is saying good job to his guys. Okay. What would send a message to the head of the Chinese PSB instead would be if Besant were to sit down in the meeting and to say, hey, we just picked up your money man in Las Vegas. He's now in a Supermax holding cell guarded by the FBI. Let's start our trade discussion. All of a sudden, he's going to be like, oh, crap, he means business.
Chris mentioned the famous scene involving the beheaded horse from The Godfather. That's to illustrate how strong the message needs to be to get through the heads of these Chinese deal cadres.
One of the things is President Trump, I think, would get a lot of credibility to basically, do the horse head thing with a country or a company or whatever. I think TikTok would be a great example where he could basically, shoot TikTok between the eyes and, make a point and be like, okay, you guys wanted to play, so there we go, it's dead. Boom. And make a point.
These are ways the Trump administration can carry out the trade war on American terms. So what else can the United States do to avoid being dragged into the CCP's timeline? Stay with us. Follow the show. Rate us 5 stars. We're on Apple and Spotify. Search for China Watch Epoch Times. This podcast is a weekly production with new episodes every Monday evening, plus bonuses. Support independent journalism by subscribing to the Epoch Times. You're welcome to share your thoughts with me at terri.wu@epochtimes.com. How can the United States avoid falling into the trap of the Chinese regime? Alex told me, in 90 days, if no agreement has been reached, the United States should go all out in a trade war to force China back on the U.S.'s timeline. To him, the all-out trade war will include restoring tariffs to the previous high levels, expanding the sanction list of Chinese companies, and launching investigations into the COVID-19 origin and the regime's persecution of China's ethnic minorities and religious groups. That is a possible outcome at the end of 90 days. He said, I don't think the CCP will choose to surrender to Washington because for the party, safeguarding China's economy or Chinese people's quality of life is never the first priority. Staying in power is the most important for the regime. To keep its political power, the CCP cannot show that it has compromised with the United States because it's now ruling with nationalism after communist ideology bankrupted in China. Ye Yaoyuan, a professor of international studies at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, is more confident that Trump won't allow himself to be fooled again. He told me, we'll have to see how determined Trump is. He can immediately restore the tariffs, but that will have a huge impact on the U.S. domestic industries. He has done it once. Will he deliberately prepare to do it again? Or he can use other means to decouple industries between the United States and China. By other means, he meant backlisting Chinese companies and restricting U.S. investments to specific Chinese industries or companies. He thinks if Beijing doesn't offer any significant concessions to Washington by July, Trump may restore the tariffs. The professor said one thing that's different than Trump's first term is the American public opinion on China. If the CCP drags it out until the midterms, it may not hurt Trump for sure because the American public now wants the United States to be tougher on China. That's it for today. Between now and next Monday, spread the word about our new show to your friends and family. We need your help to get our name out there. Till next time, I'm Terri Wu. Thanks for listening.